So it's a big
You gonna talk
issue.
about
I know
that?
it sounds.
We're gonna talk
No,
about
it's something I want to talk to you about after.
Oh, now I got you. Now I, okay.
All right, thank you all. We're gonna get the meeting started. There's one more person, that we hope will join us, as the meeting progresses. So good morning and welcome. My name is Joanna Rogalski. I'm Regional Planner with Naugatuck+Valley Council of Governments, and which is comprised, and I also work with the Regional Planning Commission, which we have some members with today. These are 19 municipalities that are represented on the Regional Planning Commission, and also in our NVCOG region, 19 municipalities. So a couple months ago, a representative from Mobility, Emma Paulino, right here, she contacted John DiCarlo, which is down at the, he's down sitting at the end with the beard, about our NVCOG Regional Service Corps, asking if Mobility could speak with NVCOG CEOs about the Mobility company and the wireless telecommunications infrastructure products they're offering the region, and in particular a network of towers on which small cell technology would be installed. So at least 6 of our NVCOG member municipalities have already been approached by Mobility. So NVCOG staff thought this would be a good opportunity for our CEOs and Regional Planning Commission members to ask questions and get the bigger picture of Mobility's proposed telecommunications infrastructure for our municipalities, region, and hopefully the state. Over the past few weeks, we asked our members to submit questions to NVCOG staff concerning Mobility and its plans. A week ago, we sent these questions to Emma Paulino in anticipation of this meeting and in the hope that answers could be provided during this meeting. NVCOG staff wants to make sure our members are able to make informed decisions about what they choose to develop in their cities and towns. So the Mobility team that's joining us today is Emma Paulino.
Yes.
She's the NRE permitting manager. We have Pete Jeffrey,
That's me.
right there, New England Regional Director, and Luke Galvin, he's the New England Construction Manager. And we, to the Mobility team, thank you for coming, and we look forward to learning more about your company, the products you propose, and the answers to some of the questions, or hopefully all the questions that we posed to you. So
Thank
I'll
you,
give this
Joanna.
to Emma. Thank you.
So much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for allowing us this opportunity. And particularly, John, thank you for your efforts in coordinating all of this for us. We're here today to introduce Mobility and our proposed hybrid transport network. Many of the communities that are here today may have received an introduction package from us, and that package was intended to be an introduction package, but unfortunately, by its content and its wording, left less to be desired than we anticipated. Because of that, we recognize that we've made a mistake there, and we have issued letters that will be hand-delivered to the jurisdictions that received the introduction package, addressing 2 critical points. One was that no timeline has been initiated, no official consulting period was initiated by the delivery of our introduction package. It was simply intended to introduce who we were and what our plans were. The second thing that it addressed was a confirmation that we always intended to get all government approvals required to build our network, and that includes the CSC and PURA processes. We have been and continue to be in discussion with the CSC and PURA in determining the process that our infrastructure should follow. So with that said, please accept our sincere apologies for a very serious misconception in the industry. But we had always intended and will intend to follow all processes for governmental approval. So who is Mobility and why are we proposing our hybrid network? Mobility is a privately held company with CLEC status, Competitive Local Exchange Carrier status. What we are is an infrastructure builder as a solution to mobile carriers' backhaul issues. As you know, today, the way we communicate is changing. Everything is data-driven. We don't use our phones anymore for phones. We use our phones as computers. We have instant access to television, to games. We have apps for everything from banking to reservations at restaurants. These are all data-driven technologies, and that is what is in use today. What's coming is even more exciting. But the carriers look to making sure that their network can support this capability. And this is what our broadband, what our hybrid transport network is here to provide the solution for. Pete Jeffrey is our regional director, and he's going to talk about some of the technological design and advances in our network. So what our network is composed of are very simple structures. They are basically two types of structures. One is what we call a transport structure. The other are mini, what we call mini macros. Because Mobility received in 2011, went in front of the Public Utility Commission and received a certificate of public necessity and need, we looked to design our infrastructure and place our infrastructure where other services exist, which is public right-of-way. We've designed the structures to be very sleek. There is no ground cabinets associated with our infrastructure. Everything is hung on the pole, either on the outside or the inside of the pole. The macro site and these minis are intended to be designed in what's called a densification or cluster type of design. They're intended to provide succinct coverage in specific areas that show our carriers that there is usage in play and extended usage coming. So they're high usage areas, and the cluster design is what is intended to supply that capacity and that coverage on the network. With that said, these systems require line of sight, and they are above ground infrastructure. So we look to install what we call the transport, we look to install what we call the mini, and our system also is looking at attachments on existing infrastructure. Everything being driven by the area that needs coverage and clear line of sight to that area. So with that said, I know that Connecticut is implementing a broadband initiative, and I think some of your jurisdictions here are part of that initiative for fiber services and extended broadband. Our system works very well in conjunction with this initiative. So on that note, I'm going to let Pete speak on how the system is designed, why we're proposing where we are. With that, Pete?
Emma, if I could just briefly interrupt, so we can go around to introduce ourselves as far as to know who you're talking with. It'd be great. We'll start with the first selectman of Woodbury.
Hi, I'm Bill Bartleby, First Selectman of Woodbury.
Bob Clark, zoning chair.
Dolores Curtis, land use, Southbury.
Tammy Deloya, Land Use Prospect.
I'm Rick Dunn, the Executive Director of the Council.
I'm John DiCarlo with NVCOG.
Joanna Rogalski with NVCOG.
Christian Meyer, also NVCOG.
Ken Cockane, Mayor Bristol.
Town of Plymouth, Land Use, Marcus Lawn.
Great.
I think that's it.
Fantastic.
Hmm.
Go ahead and come into that.
So I'm just looking at your
Just
questions that you
answer.
forwarded over to Emma. Maybe that's the best way for us to kind of go about what the network is and how it was designed, by just kind of going through the questions that you forwarded over. So the first question was, what parameters and criteria were used to determine the proposed tower locations, and have a map of alternate locations. We have one customer right now that we're working with, and we also work with other wireless carriers, but this design primarily is driven through the needs of our first customer in this area. They use capacity and coverage to determine their need. As we all know, wireless technology is exploding. In the past, coverage was all that was needed, but now capacity is a larger concern. If there's not enough capacity, you can't get the throughput on the data network that you require for whatever type of apps or internet access that the user's looking for. So our customer used some pretty advanced methods to determine where their networks are weak, by using apps that were embedded in the phone that would kind of sample their experience and then report that back to the carrier. So that's how our design starts, and then from that there's standard kind of search rings that are drawn, and then we try to find structures that are within those rings that meet the criteria for the coverage. Generally, there's kind of a first attempt at trying to find those structures made in the design before it gets out to Emma and before we start working with the towns, just to kind of get a quantity and kind of a general aspect of where these facilities may go. We realize that once we kind of impact with the community, some of those may shift one way or another, and then we would come up with a final plan with the community's input. Does that answer your first question?
So you don't have, you are open to alternative
Yeah.
locations?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a tolerance that you have that goes with that?
So, yeah, the tolerance generally is more like, as Emma pointed out, we have transport poles, and then we have these mini macro poles. The transport poles, you can think of them almost like think of the whole network almost as like a hub and spoke type network, where you have these transport poles are the aggregation points for those mini macros in the field. One of the best things we think about our network is that we're not cutting up the streets to deploy fiber. All our backhaul from our mini macros back to our transport site is a wireless link. So just like the wireless link between the mini macro to the mobile phone, there's another wireless link at a different frequency from that mini macro up to the transport site. So a lot less impact, in your streets and areas of putting fiber in to deploy a high speed, high bandwidth network, right out to the farthest reaching point of the network.
A follow-up, can you tell us who the customer is?
Sure. The customer right now is Sprint.
And along with that, is the business model build it and more will come?
It is. So our president's a pretty smart guy, and he's built a business model that looks at repeatability, really, to the point of, the work that we're doing is trying to find locations in communities where these things work, right? And the ability to add another carrier in the future, right? We work with other carriers, not necessarily on this project, but we also have a lot of in-building and venue type wireless networks as well as the largest Wi-Fi network I know of in the United States in Las Vegas that we operate outside of this project, and we have all the other wireless carriers are part of those networks.
I just have one question. When you talk about high bandwidth, can you define that for us? What are you talking about? in
Well,
terms of speed
we're talking about,
capacity?
everyone's talking about 5G, right? So, and 5G is like a buzzword, There's really nothing different about 5G. 5G, all it is LTE with really good coverage and really good backhaul, right? Because right now you have, the 4G network, you have the LTE network in place, but sometimes, there's a constraint where the coverage is weak in the area, so they can't get up to the highest throughput of that technology, or the bandwidth on the backhaul is constrained. Therefore, you can't get enough through the pipe, right? You have a very small pipe that goes back to the internet, to the switching center. 5G breaks down those barriers. 5G, is LTE with really good coverage and all those backhaul issues worked out. So you can get to the maximum potential of the LTE network, whichever one's evolving toward.
But you're talking the cell.
Yes.
What about on the feed, the wireless feed back to the internet?
So the wireless feedback to the internet, what we use is a UE relay, which is a user interface relay. It's kind of like almost like a specialized modem, right? That the LTE protocol allows devices to have certain priorities set with them, right? So a standard user would have a certain level of priority set for it. It would be able to use a certain amount.
I think I made you go down a different road than I
Go ahead.
intended. Let me just try and simplify this.
Yep.
So you talked about not, one of the beauties of your system is you're not gonna be digging up streets, as we do with fiber.
Yes.
Compare for me the speed of your system to a 1 gig fiber.
Yeah, generally it's not going to be close to 1 gig fiber, but generally you're not going to need a 1 gig fiber out to every single one of your small cell nodes, right? It'd be more like 500 megabits per second type of.
So we're not talking
link.
commercial users.
You're looking at mobile users, right?
That's what I wanted to quantify.
Yeah.
We're just talking about mobile users. We're not talking about broadband for business.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
so-
you.
So let me ask a question. So if we've been notified that you're looking at locations, does that mean you've already looked at alternative locations and decided there are none available?
Generally what we've done is we've looked at, the locations, and we've tried to pick, what we thought was the best location, just to kind of quantify how many we might need in a community, right? So if we determine through working with Emma, that the locations don't work for the community, if we can just, shift them around to areas, industrial areas, commercial areas, something like that we might have missed, that are more preferable for the community, then we would just make that shift, and it might not change the site count at all, right? However, one of the things that Emma pointed out is that these transport poles really operate on a line of sight technology, right? Not only is the wireless link between the transport pole and the mini macro, the small cell, but these transport poles are also linked together with a wireless link. It's a higher speed data link, more like a 1 gig link that links the two transport poles together. That needs a line of sight technology. So it's more like a standard line of sight technology, where this other one that goes from the transport site down to the mini macro is what's called a near line of sight technology, where it doesn't necessarily have to have clear line of sight, it just has to have really good signal strength.
So maybe I just didn't get it. So have you already looked at other locations if you're proposing new poles and they didn't work? Or you just come in and say, we want new poles?
Okay, so I get it now. So generally the small cells we try to look at anything that's existing poles first, right? It is difficult sometimes with some of the utilities to co-locate on existing wooden infrastructure, wooden distribution poles, because there's lots of, concerns that they have about what can be on the pole. Some of those, for instance, Eversource doesn't allow any attachment to a pole that has primary on it. So the way distribution is set up, I don't know how familiar people are with that, is that at the top of the pole there's generally 3 wires, and they're kind of on a bar. That's called the primary service, that's high voltage. And then there's secondary power that's also.
No, I'm not talking about telephone poles, I'm talking about other cell towers. You
Oh.
said you first looked at alternative locations. In Bristol, for example, I learned yesterday that you're looking at 10 locations in Bristol. I find it hard to believe you've looked at other locations and they're proposing 10 new locations in Bristol.
Well, I think what we did with these towns, as
Yeah.
I understood it, is we looked at locations that needed to serve a coverage or capacity area. And in this type of densification design, those areas, like Pete was saying, the usage comes from us. So the study was done, which is very easy to do in today's engineering environment, to determine areas of heavy usage and what is servicing that area. So the areas that we looked at are areas that we need to, in a cluster design, that we need to serve. So with our certificate of public need and necessity, looked at all road right-of-ways, whether that be state or town road right-of-ways. We designed our infrastructure to look like other utility infrastructure sitting in your right-of-way as a lesser visual impact. And the fact that our structure needs height and clear line of sight is how we came to these locations. Now, I've worked with a lot of jurisdictions that have said to me, Emma, we have a natural gas pipeline coming down this road. In that case, we look at somewhere else. There are jurisdictions that have said to me, I like where you are, I like what you're doing, but this is a highly traveled road, and that corner is notorious for accidents. We look at moving that pole down the street, but the key element is what we're looking at servicing, and that is that cluster area. So there could be other options there. Now, did we look at the other co-location that Peter was talking about is utility poles. Did we look at those utility poles? We did. And likely those poles had no capacity for us. Those poles, the pole that was available to us doesn't serve the design criteria that we had, that kind of thing. So in that regard, we proposed the infrastructure as we designed it. Now, we can clearly work with the jurisdictions in terms of better options for things that we don't know. Road expansions. I've had a couple jurisdictions say, you're aware that we're planning to expand the road, or the state is planning to expand this road, and it's gonna impact this. I had one jurisdiction, it was actually Groton, said because of General Dynamics electric boat explosion in hiring people, they're turning locations of commercial spaces into mixed use and that kind of thing, and wanted our design to work with what they were planning. So.
Okay, thank you.
So, one more thing with wireless networks have been evolving ever since they were started, right? Many of the wireless networks that were designed in the past were really for people driving on highways, right, getting from one location to the next. Wireless technology now is focused a lot of times on where people are, living their lives, right? So the data usage now is centered around malls and homes and venues and other places. it's not necessarily centered around some of those highways where maybe a large tower was built that holds, 6 carriers that, sits out there on the highway and serves those people. So generally, those will generally stay in place and become part of this hybrid network. But, the other ones add to the network and create more density. That's what everyone's striving for in the wireless networks is overall density.
If we were driving down the street, would we know, how do we know it's your pole? What's on top of this
It's gonna
thing?
be the tallest in the city.
Yeah.
Okay, so it'd just be a tall pole, and you're putting that on the lines where the power lines are, right? It's like a tower, only without the metal
Yeah,
look.
so
Here are some examples.
Okay,
So-
I didn't get any of this, I'm sorry.
I'll just talk to the smaller one first. So the smaller pole has generally what's called an omnidirectional antenna that goes on top of the pole. It could be a street lamp. I think that's what's shown in there is a street lamp or a, why don't we talk which one's which there, Emma?
And is
This-
the lamp or
this-
is your antenna, I assume?
These are the antenna. This
Yeah.
is a transport pole. This is the higher steel transport pole.
Okay.
These are the mini macros. Here is an example of one that looks exactly like a utility.
Okay.
Here are some examples where we can stealth these kind of designs and make them look like a
Fundamental.
light pole. Some of these are light poles that our antennas are co-locating on.
You put them in front of Dollar General stores?
How high is
We're having a
high?
big issue. Might as well get it all in the same
The
spot.
transport poles are typically 120 feet in height. They are steel. They sit in an embedment type of foundation. The minis range in size from anywhere from 45 to 79 feet in height, depending on design, depending on location, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural, and depending on geography, whether it's a flat area, a mountainous area, etc. And those poles can be wood to look like other utility in the right-of-way. They can be steel, and we have potential to stealth them as light poles if they're on town roads on a corner. The example I gave you about, in Groton, about the mixed-use development, they loved the light pole idea.
Hmm.
In the
So-
packets you handed out, there are no actual photos of the 120-foot poles, are there?
These are photo
The first one
sims.
is-
Is that 120
Yes,
foot?
Yes,
Okay.
These are the.
those are photo sims.
So it's, are you saying it's more population than topography that determines where the poles go, or?
The pole locations, as I understand
Mhm.
it, are designed for areas where coverage and capacity is needed. The size and the type are determined on geography and locations, whether you're rural, suburban, or urban. Yes.
Now, being in our town, you proposed 2 poles to the, transport structures.
One on a state highway, right, and
And
one
yes,
on
in a
your
town
town
right of
road,
way.
yeah.
How many mini macros will be needed to support each of those tower structures or transport structures?
We don't have any minis proposed at this release.
What does that mean, I'm sorry?
Well,
At
the
this
state,
time.
the state of Connecticut, we're doing this on a national scale. So the state of Connecticut is being built out not all at once, in releases. So this I call phase 1. I'm not aware of what the plans are for the next phases.
Well,
Maybe-
I think that what Emma's pointing out, I'm just gonna grab something out of her file here, is that, the original ones, the letters were sent out to the towns, were just transport poles.
No, I think there were minis too.
Were there minis in there as well?
And how tall are those?
The mini macros vary in size depending on the design criteria.
But that was the one you said was 70 foot?
anywhere from as low as 36, 40 feet, all the way to 79 feet.
Okay. But I mean, a standard Cobra head is about 25 feet. This pole right here.
Oh, no,
about 25 feet.
about 40.
That's probably about
40 or
35, 40
40
feet.
feet.
Yeah.
And none of these pictures show utility wires. I mean,
No.
so, I mean, but we all have above ground wirings in most places.
On the
Right, so,
tra-
So where would you go around those poles, behind those poles, what do you do with them?
On the transport poles are typically, the wire is pulled underground
Mhm.
and pulled inside the pole.
No,
On
where
the
does it,
mini-
where does it fit? Are you putting it in the same taking zone where the telephone pole is?
so,
Where-
you mean like an existing wooden distribution pole?
Yeah.
Attaching to that?
No.
No?
You got poles down the side of the road.
Yep, okay.
Is your pole gonna go in that right away, or you putting it somewhere else?
Usually it's on
In-
the other side, it's offset.
We're not putting
Okay.
it inside the utility.
Okay, so okay.
Right,
Alright.
the utility line has a lot of restrictions,
Mm.
because they need access to their
That's
line.
why I couldn't picture
So
near
you-
there, so you'll be on the other side of the street.
We're in a right of
And
way.
then you gotta go underground to get to their source, their power, right?
We're
Well,
gonna-
Like, sometimes if it's overhead distribution, they'll serve the houses on the other side of the street with feeds that just drop across the street overhead.
Mhm.
So if that's the case, we
You
would
just
do
do the same
that.
thing, okay.
But if it's fed underground, we would do it underground.
Okay, no, I was just trying to figure out what.
We follow whatever
Okay,
the typical delivery method is that the utility promotes.
okay.
So going back to Tammy's question about number of minis, that I am not aware of. I don't know what the full design is throughout all these different releases. But I do know that usage will dictate ample capacity. So if driverless cars comes to Prospect, perhaps there will be expansion to that network because your citizens are demanding it by what they're utilizing. The smart homes using remote controls for your oven, for your heat, for all these things. The more that residences and businesses utilize the technology, the more need, as is happening now. We all bought and made this business of the smartphones and stand in line to buy Apple phones. So it's driven by a new generation, and it's driven by a new way that we live. So
Emma, with all due respect, we understand that the community, the population at large is driving the demand on this.
Mhm.
Your client is trying to fill in those gaps where they can't service the demand. The question, I think, most pertinent is this. If in the first release, you're going to go through the regulatory process to locate 2 poles in Prospect, are you going to go through another regulatory process in future releases, or
Absolutely.
it's one thing to say, we're gonna comply with the law, but if the law doesn't require you to come back again and file a new plan, that's a different understanding of the process
Right.
from the municipal end. So the question, at least from my end, for all the communities is, if you only know what poles are going up today in release number 1, which I'll be honest with you, a company as big as this, I kind of find it hard to believe you only know what release number 1 is within your company.
Well, I at my level, I
Fair
at my
enough.
level.
Fair enough. But the question is, given the regulatory process in Connecticut, would all of your poles in every release require a separate application to Pura and the siding company?
As
Yes.
we understand it now, absolutely.
Yes, every single one.
And excuse me, on that question, seeing that Bristol has 10, Prospect right now has 2, do each pole have an individual application, or So Prospect would get 2 separate applications, Bristol would get 10.
Originally, we were told 2, and I just found out yesterday when my corp council met with them that there's 8 more that they're looking at.
Is there 2 in
So
Prospect still?
that wasn't
Still
divulged
2
to
in
us
Prospect.
originally.
That I know of, Tammy, that I know of. We, as we have more and more of these meetings, we met with the CCM yesterday. I've met with 2 other council of governments. I feed back all of the questions and all of the concerns that occur at these meetings, and this is one of them. Everybody is asking for a better understanding of a proposed build-out in each particular area. Now, I understood as we were releasing this project in phases, that it was phases to cover all the towns. So we haven't hit we haven't contacted every jurisdiction. I think here, Woodbury is one that I don't think anything went out to.
No.
So my understanding were the phases were to complete all the towns. So that is a question that's been posed, and an answer will come in terms of how this build-out is being initiated.
So the process at this point is, you're basically gonna start, fresh, send us out new packages, and these will be applications coming out? And start the process, or this will just be another introduction?
No, this will be an official package with all the requirements that the CSC requires we have to initiate a formal consultation by which a clock will begin, that the jurisdictions will have 90 days to work through location and on our proposal. So the clock will start on this next formal submittal, and that submittal will have and meet requirements that the CSC requires that you, the jurisdiction, have in front of you.
So are you going through CSC or are you using Pura?
So all the new poles, any new structure goes through CSC, and any attachment to an existing structure goes through Pura. So like if we're attaching to wooden distribution, then we would go through Pura. If we're going if we're proposing any new pole, whether it's a wood pole, a metal pole, mini macro, transport pole, all those new poles go through CSC.
That's different than your company told my corporation council yesterday. They told us all poles were going through Pura.
Well, who told you that?
I wish my corporation council couldn't make it today. I just had a meeting with him
Yeah.
this morning before I came.
So
Brian
that's
Gaud-
inaccurate.
Yeah, Brian Gaudet is
Right.
the
It was
permitting.
Brian they met with.
Yeah, he's the
I was
permitting
texting my
manager
corporate
for
council
Northern
now.
Connecticut.
Right.
And Brian is our almost our utmost expert on the CSC. So I'm sure that there was a little bit of misunderstanding, because
Find out right now.
he
Yep.
is our, yeah. But to answer your question, Tammy, also, we are continually talking to the CSC, and we're in a process with them now. But because our product doesn't fit perfectly in the CSC's published processes, we're working through finalized processes. We're very, very clear that every pole will go through the CSC and every attachment will go through the Pura. How we make those applications, you asked if it's a one each. That may be given to us, and we can do it in a bulk process, but they still have to go in front of the council, and it still has to be approved.
So basically, in just the easiest terms here, basically you're going to contact us, we're gonna have 90 days to work with you regarding potential locations and issues, to work something out before it goes to a finalized review through the SC.
Yes. Yes.
And they are the ones that are actually going to have the power to say yes or no. It's
Yes.
not in the well, you'll work with the jurisdiction for the towns. The towns actually are not the ones giving the go-ahead, it's more like the wind turbine situation.
Right, the CSC has domain over the jurisdictions, but the CSC has made it very, very clear to us that they want proof that there is strong communication between the towns, and they will clearly wanna see that we have done our very, very best in working through an amenable location for our infrastructure.
Can I give her a good example?
So,
So, good example, just past projects, same process, siting council, right? So, the application gets filed, so I did one maybe a year ago, year and a half in Southington, right, for a new pole. The application gets filed, siting council, goes to the jurisdiction for their 90-day period. So that jurisdiction came back and said, okay, we see where you wanna put it, but in this case, it was different project, right? So it was private land, and the town wanted it on their property. So they said, did you look at this place? Did you look at this place? Did you look at this place? Which we had not, so we did. And we reviewed all of those locations in full, incomplete, right? So the 90 days is typically, the town has that time to respond. If we have to execute some action, right, then that action gets executed. So in that case, the town said, can you go here? We reviewed those places. It didn't work out that we could, there was wetlands and all these things, right? But then that process gets closed. So the towns within that process, you get that opportunity to communicate whatever, really.
And we certainly have the ability to attend public hearings. I'm sure this
Yes.
will go to a public hearing at CSC.
They do,
And we would
yes.
be able to offer our input at that time as well.
Yes.
And that, and that's our intention to fully comply with. Mobility is, on a national scale, we're building this project. It is their direction to us in the field that we work side by side as partners with the jurisdictions, and we do so to the best of our ability. Naturally, we have to meet the coverage parameters.
so, I mean, I think we all understand the statute regulations are designed to prevent municipalities from placing roadblocks in your way. The siting council controls of this, municipalities cannot veto it. The question I have is, when we're talking about local rights of way, your certificate allows you to still place it there with siting council permission, even over the objections of the municipality, is that correct?
Yes.
I have a, you come out of this building, you will come kind of a thing.
What's that?
You know, if you put this one in, more will come. You have one customer now, but, you know, Verizon might say, good, we want one too. Does that mean a second 90-foot pole or whatever size you have, 120-foot pole, or do you put it on the same pole as this other?
So the 120-foot pole is set up for 2 carriers, so that can host, you know, one tenant and another tenant. The small cell poles are not generally set up in that way, because
So if two, you need another pole, small pole.
for the small one.
Right.
But the bigger pole is set up for 2 carriers.
Well, I've seen that picture on the internet of the Orient somewhere where wires are all over these little narrow streets. So, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that
I mean-
what we're gonna see? No.
I think that the idea that, I was in a meeting the other day and I was, you know, we were talking about, the same type of issue. And, I just did a quick calculation where in a quarter-mile linear stretch of road, if you assume like 100-foot, pole spacing, you know, for distribution, that's 13 poles, right? So if we add another pole to that, that's 14. So I think it's an increase of about 8%, right, in
Mhm.
the total number of poles. No new wires, right, other than the wire that
Yeah.
feeds that one pole, right? But we're not stringing wires down that whole run. If a second carrier comes along, it's basically linear, so it's a second pole. I think it was like 16% increase in total number of poles in that quarter-mile stretch. So it's not like we're doubling the number. It's not exponential. It's just a, you know, a linear progression of, you know, one pole per carrier per mini macros if they have needs in that area.
In the
Now,
hilly,
going back to, I'm sorry.
in the hilly northwest,
Yep.
Again, I'm not sure we're gonna get another pole because this condominium complex has 400 people in it, or because we have a lot of little hills and you need it on the hill. So is it gonna be, you're gonna go into town open space or state forest or something to put the poles in there?
And it could be light poles, it could be, you know, anything like that. It doesn't have to be a.
Again, though, this is based on usage,
Yeah.
right, on data usage. So this is the focus, the cluster and densification is on data usage.
Okay, so it's going to be more where people are.
People are.
Rather than height, because your signal
Exactly.
is skipping over the
Correct.
top of the existing tower.
Correct.
Okay,
I'll
that's-
give you an example it'll be a layperson example in the days of cellular. When cellular first came out, and every high dollar executive carried this huge brick phone. You had towers on very high peaks that could boom coverage. You had very few users. Then PCS technology came out where all of us were able to afford the phones, and we all loved this newfangled device, and we got it. That changed the technology. And those boom sites were no longer what was necessary to allow the traffic and the usage pattern, so they started developing the towers like we know them now. They came down into the valley off the boom sites, and they were covering a wider area. Those sites, as more and more users began buying cell phones, those sites just had radio channels expanded. They'd add another panel antenna on the same. This is now a whole different type of technology. This technology, this small cell technology, is really driven now by data usage because everything is going that way. The phone isn't voice anymore. The phone is a mini computer. So the whole technology is different. So I remember when I was in the industry then, they had the same concept. Can't you put it over there? You need a lot of height. You
Mhm.
want to do this. The technology
Not
didn't need
different.
that
Okay.
anymore. Yeah.
So going back to your question about, you know, the CSC, I think you asked a question about, can we go in the right of way with objection of the community? I don't think that that's necessarily the CSC's, thought process on this.
No, that wasn't my question. My question was, what's the law? And the law is that they can approve a site over the objection of the municipality in a public right of way.
Right, but I mean, we've met with the Pura and the CSC twice.
I appreciate that. I've dealt with them, I know them.
Yep.
I know the commissioners. I understand how the process works.
Right, the perspective I got was that really what they wanted to do is they wanted to, basically, I like to say, strike the gavel and pop the cork.
Mhm.
That they want us to work out everything with you
Yep.
guys ahead of time, right? So that when they call the hearing, everybody's comfy cozy with it, and no one objects, and all they gotta do is just approve it.
Yeah, they don't want problems.
Right.
On a wide scale.
Yeah.
And, you know, frankly, your rollout caused some wide scale concerns.
Yep.
So that's kind of why we're here today, dealing with it the way we're dealing with it. But I think this issue of where towns own right of way, and you can get a pole sited within their right of way because of your certificate, and CSC can approve it in an individual case over the objection of the town. And the town's not compensated as it would have been with a cell tower or something like that. I think there's a twin concern there. One is about compensation, the other is about control. And those are the things I hear from towns on a regular basis. It's not so much whether it's one more pole in an existing pole line, or
Yeah.
it's unsightly, or it's more efficient. It's really about their own sense of local control over this.
Yep. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer that kind of evolved into this director position through the roles that I've had for the past 20 years. So what I do know though is that certain states have other laws, right? So for instance, you know, there's a state that has a law that municipalities cannot charge access to the right of way, right? That state, you know, they can charge some type of application fee, they can charge whatever they want, you know, for that right-of-way franchise agreement. And this is the actual communities within the state, they can charge that. And I don't think that that would apply to CSC, because, you know, it's a right-of-way access agreement that you'd work out with, you know, the carrier, right, with us, and they would approve it, but in the end, you know, it's almost like a cable franchise agreement. Do you guys have cable franchise agreements
Yeah.
per town?
We used to.
Used to. You don't have them anymore?
I don't believe so.
Okay. But then other states, you know, allow, you know, fees to be charged. So, you know, generally those fees that are charged are in line with the regulated rates for attachment on, you know, wooden distribution. That's generally what the business model is kind of fits around, you know, which could be in the neighborhood of like $2,500 a year per pole, right? We realize that's not a lot per pole, but when you add up the number of poles, it starts to be something, you know, that, you know, can compensate the
Substantial.
community. So I'd say that it'd be best for us to maybe work with our lawyer that we've been working with in the state to determine what laws are in place, unless you already know of laws that would either allow or preclude you from, you know, opening up a franchise agreement with a wireless provider for access to your right-of-way.
You know, going back to my example of how things have changed, the towers that were built, that were placed on private property afforded the amount of space they needed and the amount of space they were taking up. Those towers were in 100 by 100, sometimes more, compound, with sometimes 3 equipment cabinets placed in that compound. And that's where they went to private property to acquire that kind of space, and then rents came along that line. But our infrastructure doesn't take up anything like that. It was designed to be in the right-of-way. It was designed in a sleek and clean, utility-looking type of design. So, like Pete was saying, it's providing a service to the town like all other infrastructure in your roadways. Albeit underground, it's still providing that service. There's a very good article here that I'll pass out on real estate values, and the title of this says "Towers Can Help." These aren't towers, they're poles. But this talks about and this is from New Canaan, Connecticut, about the effect to real estate values. And in the CCM, the attorney mentioned this also in the CCM meeting, but he went the opposite way. A pole in front of your house that's supplying broadband is what people want. They say that real estate agents are saying schools are secondary, are a second question when people are looking at moving to an area. The first question is, what are your services? And for children that are in schools or are advanced, want language classes that aren't offered at regular schools, broadband capacity is what gets them to connect to these other alternatives. Smart homes, that's what's being built by local developers. So the service that's being provided is the key. Like Peter said,
No, in
financial
all fairness, that's what you want the discussion to be about. That's not why we're sitting around the table, though. We're sitting around the table because there's municipal concern about how this process is going forward. You keep wanting to sell us on the need for capacity. I think we all agree. There's no argument over that. We all have one. We all use them constantly.
but the angle is you can't have it without infrastructure.
Well,
And we're the
that goes without
infrastructure
saying. I don't think
builder.
there's any disagreement about that. But let's not keep changing the subject back to what the community needs.
Okay.
We'll stipulate to that point.
So why don't we get back into the questions that you guys asked and make sure we
And
cover all
I got a
those.
quick follow-up on
Go
that,
ahead.
to something Emma mentioned, that, you know, he asked about future rollout, yes, it's determined by need, but it's hard to believe that there isn't some knowledge of what a future rollout is. You said you don't know it at your level.
At my level.
Well, at the level that you wanna do a more effective rollout than the initial one, wouldn't it be good to put all of that out there? So that everybody knows up front, it's not at your level, but somebody's level can put it to your level, and then we can put it out to the towns, what potential future expansion might be.
I have brought that back. It wasn't an awareness of mine until I heard from the townships that we've met with.
And I have a question.
Yes.
What about the maintenance of these poles or towers, however you wanna call them? Who's gonna be liable for maintaining them? What if one
We-
falls down? What's going on with that?
We own the infrastructure
And you'll continue to own it?
and will continue to own them, to insure them, and we have what is called a NOC. Stands for.
Network Operations Center. So
Network Operations Center.
they're all monitored, and if there's some type of issue that we can detect, we would respond on it normally. If there was something where, you found something wrong with the pole, there'd be a phone number on the box where you could contact the NOC, and we would have teams staffed up that would respond and remedy whatever was the issue.
What about graffiti and stuff on the poles?
Graffiti on the poles, generally, in my past experience, you try to, paint the poles with some type of anti-graffiti paint so that you can blast it off with a power washer or whatever.
But if the city notifies you of graffiti on a pole or writing on a pole, you'll come out and take care of it?
Yeah, I think we would.
That wasn't a pretty positive, yeah, I think we would.
So do you consider leasing private land at all?
So our whole, the business, the industry is moving, and I don't wanna go your direction again with, trying to sell something. But, the private land is sometimes the reason why our wireless bills are so high, right? Because private land is a little greedy. Maybe I should just leave it there.
Yeah, it's not your business model, and you all need to reduce costs.
Yeah.
That's,
I have a question regarding the poles. These are hollow?
Yes, they are.
Okay, at 45 miles an hour, what's the result of hitting this or a wooden pole? Which comes out better?
So the wooden poles, I'll just speak to, we've met with a lot of different people. One of the people I met with was a DOT in a state, not this state, but another state. And we sat down with a lot of the engineers that have to sign off on the permits, right? And they're the ones that get brought into tort, hearings when someone has an accident and hits a structure, right? So the recommendations they gave us was wood poles. Generally, you can put them anywhere as long as it's behind the guardrail or outside what they call the clear zone, right? So there's gonna be some type of setback from the road, and then there might be, a guardrail. If it's their guardrail, it's be behind the guardrail. Otherwise, it's some setback from the road for a wood pole. For a metal pole with a foundation, their guideline there is that it needs to be further setback. There's another clear zone that they have for that. And, if at all possible, some type of natural barrier, right, that would preclude the person from going into that structure, right? So, for instance, Emma pointed out you don't want to put this on the corner of a bend. You probably want to put it on the straightaway or something like that, where someone's not going to be, falling asleep at the wheel and going off the road and into it. They do suggest any type of what they don't call them guardrails anymore. They call them guide rails, because, it doesn't guard the person, it just guides the person, guides their car away from the obstruction. So they do suggest, if needed, a guide rail that would be adjacent to the pole that would guide people back into the roadway if they were, going off the roadway.
I'm just thinking of where we are in Woodbury. There aren't guide rails on most of our roads. And so and it's not uncommon, on 47, for example, for somebody to go into a pole. And what happens when 120 feet of pole comes down? Now, in terms of a terms of come on, think, in terms of a power, wind power, you have to allow for that thing falling and not hitting a neighbor, for example.
Right.
What's the situation here?
What I understand on our steel poles, how wide are your right-of-ways overall in your town of Woodbury?
From the center of the road,
Road.
25 feet.
Okay. So we could, we don't have too much right-of-way to work in, but we could put these poles at the far end. The pole comes in two pieces. The break point, I understand, is at about the 85-foot level. The likelihood that the pole would fall at an accident is unlikely. In terms of like a wind turbine, the turbine has blades that very few have fallen, but the intent was to cover the blades if something happened to the blade. If the blade got torn off in a very, very bad hurricane, they wanted a fall zone to protect that, but not that the whole tower would come down. The foundation under those wind turbines is atrocious.
Right.
But we don't have anything that's hanging off of our tower that can get caught with ice sheets coming down, or can get torqued in a bad weather condition. So the worst that's going to happen is it's going to be hit, and it's going to be like hitting a brick wall. But the likelihood of it tumbling somewhere is very low in weather or otherwise.
But the transport poles are generally, placed in an area where, we avoid a placement to a place where someone's gonna run into it, right? It's gonna be set back, it's gonna be protected, it's gonna be, behind a berm, whatever is there that allows for a natural barrier to that pole. The wood poles are gonna be more, just like the other wood poles on the side of the street. I mean, I live in Groton, Mass, right? And, I'm always amazed how many oak trees, old oak trees, are within inches of the side of the road, right? And oak trees don't move either, right? So I think that, the ability of getting that metal pole back far enough from the right-of-way is our ability to, provide a safe environment for people that might be distracted and leave the roadway. So I'm
And
looking
this
at
is
more
where
of your
it's helpful.
questions. I want to make sure we get through the questions, because I don't want to think that this was something where we didn't pay attention to these. We covered, we can share propagation once we get into those discussions with individual locations. We talked about one customer. We said that these are two customer for the transport poles, one customer for the mini macros. We talked about number 4, we will own the tower and we will maintain it. Number 5, we will allow people to co-locate on our pole, right? It is a pole that, we are a CLEC, I'm gonna call it a CLEC.
Mhm.
And part of that is it's bi-directional, right? So if we put up a pole, we have to allow people to locate on that pole, whether that's municipal or whether it's private, it's part of the deal.
We actually encourage it.
Yep.
There's only one other, you said a max of one other user.
One other major carrier.
On the transport pole.
Right.
The reason that that's done is really, there is kind of a point at which, you see these 6 carrier monopoles on the side of the highway. Those things are massive. I mean, they're even a lot larger than what we're talking about, right? The base of that pole, on a 6-carrier pole, can be, 6 feet in diameter. It's a much larger structure. So if you go more than 2 carriers on one of those transport poles, you're gonna be talking about a much, much larger structure. Recently, one of the communities asked us, well, what if we wanted a 6-carrier? Then I guess, we'd look at that option and we'd figure out a way that we could help you build it, but I don't think we'd be building that on the side of the road. It would probably be something where we'd be maybe looking for municipal property and trying to see if there was a way that we could, lease that municipal property at a rate that's kind of similar to the rate that we would do in a right-of-way environment. Just gonna go through some more of these questions, make sure we get them all covered, because I know you spent a lot of time on them. I don't wanna leave them hanging.
I
There
think
was
noise was another question.
Noise, there's no noise at all on the mini macros. The mini macros are totally passively cooled. There are no batteries. And no noise at all from that. The transport poles do have some fans. It's not like it has had air conditioner or anything like that, but there are some fans in the transport pole that pull air through the equipment.
So the fans are located where, on the base and pull it up, or
And-
up and pull it down, or?
There's boxes on the outside of the pole,
Mhm.
and they're in the base of that box, so they pull the air, they pull the air in from the bottom and force it up through the equipment out the top.
But not something where a home that might be 50 feet, 100 feet away from this.
No, you
will
would
hear
not hear it, yeah. It's not like we're talking about a giant, air conditioning unit that cools a whole building in the old days. This is more like a fan that just cools the equipment. We haven't received any permission yet for any towers in Connecticut. We could do photographic simulations. We showed you some. We do have 2 of these that are stood up. They're in Texas, so I don't know if anybody wants to take a road trip, but that's where the 2 are right now that are stood up near the manufacturer's location. Number 13, you talked about a mock-up. We were questioning that last night. We weren't totally sure what you meant by a mock-up. You mean a full-sized,
Build just a small model, like an architectural.
a model, yeah. I could find out if we have something like that. I haven't seen anything yet, but that's a good question. Long-range plan for adding equipment or replacing equipment on the tower. Generally, these towers are gonna be built to, certain criteria, 2 carriers, some.
And they're built to that structural capability.
Right, so that it's not like we're gonna be able to add on to it, 6 carriers onto a 2-carrier pole.
I think, the question was more about your equipment gets outdated. You
Right.
wanna replace it with the latest technology.
Yep.
I think that's where that question was going.
Okay. I think that's an interesting crystal ball. Like I said, I've been in the industry for 20 years. I started in New York City in 1995, and there the cell sites were 300 feet tall, right, in Manhattan. Now the average site of a cell site in Manhattan is probably about 50 feet tall. It covers the street, so it's hard to say. There's hardly anybody expected the kind of overwhelming data impact in mobile wireless coverage. So right now the ultimate goal is small cell technology to accomplish the needs that we're finding in the environment. So I can't see that there's going to be anything more than maybe more small cells, but at some point, you know, the density will be there, and technology, you know, may evolve a little bit more into other technologies. People yesterday were asking us about, should we wait, you know? I mean, I remember being in hearings in 1995, you know, in some of the more difficult areas of Massachusetts, and they constantly said, well, what about satellites, and what about these balloons and stuff like that? And it's been now 20 years, and still nobody's got satellites working or balloons working that provide this stuff. So we have to go with something that's, you know, physically possible.
You know, the closer we're getting to, you know, I remember the cartoon, The Jetsons, right? I mean, are hovercrafts coming, and, you know, can we beam ourselves up? I mean, maybe we're getting closer to that, and closer to that futuristic guess. Maybe we're going in that direction, you know? Maybe we'll be able to zap ourselves somewhere in time, who knows? But this is the latest and greatest now. The equipment is really small, can be hidden, designs can be sleek, no noise. It's what we know now to deliver what we need now.
So number 15 talked about
Oh,
batteries.
Tammy had a question?
Oh.
Tammy?
I can ask it after, it's just a procedural, go ahead.
Okay, number 15 asked about batteries. There are some batteries on the transport pole. You know, that's more or less kind of a mandate by the FCC that if anything carries a certain amount of traffic, it needs to have some type of battery backup, because they, you know, for emergency purposes. That would be the only time that those would be in place. And they're, again, on a cabinet on the side of the pole, so it's not, there's nothing that's touching the ground other than the pole. You asked a question about bus shelters. That's an interesting question. It's tough to do something where traffic is going to affect the coverage. So, for instance, a bus shelter. If the bus pulls up, you got no coverage on the other side of the street, because now your antennas just got blocked by the bus. So anything that's like, you know, less height than a tractor trailer or a bus generally isn't a great antenna location. So most of the antennas need to be higher than that. If the bus shelter had some type of appurtenance that came off the side of it that allowed the antenna to be higher than the bus shelter, that would be feasible. I know that some bus shelters in some of the cities that I've seen, they set up like little Wi-Fi hotspots for the people that are just standing in the bus shelter. They're able to use them in the bus shelter, but it doesn't provide coverage, you know, in the general area. It's just the bus shelter.
And we have the equipment too, so
Right.
it has to be structurally capable of handling the equipment and clean line of sight for antenna like Pete said.
Yeah. And then number 17, I think, is probably the most important question in here, is how much leeway exists in Mobility's part to adjust proposed locations. You know, honestly, I'd like to see more feedback on where these locations, you know, the communities prefer, so that, you know, we can proceed forward, and rather than kind of give one and find out you don't like it, and then give another and find out you don't like it.
On that note.
Yeah.
Because I'm gonna be going back and I'm gonna get questions from, and they just want general answers.
Right.
You know, it's all about the mighty dollar.
Yep.
So basically, when you say you want proposed alternate locations to test, to go through your testing, so those proposed alternates also have to be in a right of way, not on a private where the
Not
company
ne-
will have to pay.
Not necessarily. We're not looking at private property, but when I was at your planning meeting, they talked about that 120-foot being on that municipal property right behind your office building.
Correct.
So that is in consideration. When I came back from that meeting.
So you would pay the town to have that pole there?
Yeah, the only thing about the municipal property is, and again, I'm not the lawyer. I know some states' laws are very strict on RFP, right? So, for instance, you know, state just north of here, they, you know, everything has to go out through RFP if it's a lease, right? If it's a license, it doesn't have to go through RFP. So you can shorten the term And some lawyers perform some magic and it becomes this license which doesn't have to go to RFP. If something like that goes out to RFP, then, you know, it's like an auction. You know, the bid price just goes higher and the next thing you know, it becomes something that's really not feasible, right? But, you know, if we can work out reasonable, you know, yearly rates for municipal property, that'd be great.
And remember the amount of space, like in the property that you recommended, there was that's a ball field. I mean, this takes up no more than, one of your light ballasts.
Right.
So in that regard, that, you know, we can consider that, but most important, it's that coverage cluster, that densification of coverage. And I wasn't familiar with how far away that was from the original proposed roadway, right-of-way, and that's what's being reviewed since I
Yeah, it's
came.
very close, actually.
Yeah.
We're fortunate in that sense, both the locations are close to, more desirable locations for the town that I don't think would
Yes.
change too much of
Perfect.
the data coming in or whatever. technical
Perfect. So if
things.
location works, then it just comes down to a reasonable amount of dollars commensurate with the amount of minimal space.
And, assuming we go through this process, we go through the 90 days, go to the siding council grants your locations. While you don't need zoning or wetlands or whatever approval, you still need a building permit issued through the town, correct?
A building permit?
How's that work? Is it just electrical
Yeah.
permit or building permit?
Depends on the town, but
I would think you'd need, you know,
Yeah.
building,
Okay.
electrical.
usually once you get the
Usually
certificate
we
from
get-
siding council, right, then we take that, go to build, you file in the town for your building and or electrical.
Right, that's my understanding
Yeah.
of how it's gonna work.
That's
Um,
normal, yeah.
I
I-
wanna make sure like I
Yep.
said, that I'm, at least have the basics down.
Yes.
I know that we get a permit, I'm not sure it's called building.
Well, we
Like,
get-
we got a
No.
road use permit, we get encroachment permits, we get, road opening permits, road work permits, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So, absolutely,
I
we
believe a
have to have.
building permit.
Right, so
would
with,
be
you're speaking like
required.
on the transport pole,
Mhm.
right? So, or even if it's 75-foot wood, you get the certificate from the siding council. And in addition to all these other things that may be required for traffic or whatever, typically, yes, you get your certificate, you go to the town, you get your building, and you get your electrical.
Okay.
Some towns haven't required that, right? They've issued a permit for the right-of-way that allowed us to build on a location, setting a new pole, but within Connecticut, because of the siding council process,
Yeah.
I would say that's correct. Yeah.
I spoke to Melanie Bachman and she assured me a building permit
Yeah,
would be.
that's very normal,
Okay.
yeah.
So your service-driven, company or need, so if you hit a hotspot that really needs your service, how many poles could, you know, if it's a real hotspot, would you have to put up to?
I mean, generally, the poles, you know, cover an area that, you know, is, at the most dense, probably, you know, a quarter mile. So, if it was like an area that was miles of high usage, right? There might be one of those every quarter mile, right? But if it's just like one focused area that's within a quarter mile proximity, it would probably just be one pole. I think,
About radius or linear?
I have a good example.
huh?
I mean, there's a good example that's
Yeah.
quantifies it, right? Just as an example. What town are you? What's the town?
Southbury.
Southbury. So we were just looking at some sites in Rhode Island, Providence, Brown, University. So within the area that makes up Brown University, we had four, and we were using light poles, right? So, but they weren't, I mean, they were, I don't know, call it a 2-mile radius, right? Where Brown University is kind of in the middle, and it's hilly and all that.
Yeah.
So there was only 4. So in a town like Southbury, at your most dense point, might be 1, maybe 2.
And that's a university.
right? So I was using that just as the
Yeah.
point, right? I mean, the university is really
Huge.
dense, tons of kids, everything going on there, right? It's got the hills where Brown is,
Yeah.
and we only had 4 within that radius. So
Yeah, okay.
they do what they need to do,
Have you run into communities that require all utilities underground?
yes. Brown University, right?
Okay.
Providence,
If you had poles?
Light poles.
light poles, but all of the utility has to be
Okay, what
brought.
if you don't have light poles?
They have decorative light poles, right? And then they
What
had,
if you got nothing?
We can make it a decorative
you
light
propose,
pole.
yeah.
We can make it
There's
look
some
like
towns
it
where we
can be a light
proposed,
pole.
so like where Brown is, right, they have 2 things, they have the decorative ones, everything's
Mm-hmm.
underground. They have, an authority that manages more traditional looking light poles, where they've eliminated whatever was there, put the decorative, and then constructed these more traditional light poles in, you know, maybe one every block and a half, or whatever it is, right? So we were able to utilize those versus placing something new wasn't an option, right? And in places where there was nothing, like you said, so we were looking at some in, Cambridge maybe, Cambridge, Mass, I think, and so
But we can make.
they had
we-
nothing, and we proposed a light pole.
There you go.
And that happened in some other communities, right, like more Midwest, where there's pictures of, I know they're doing it in Baltimore too, right? They're actually building it, and they replaced what existed, and where there was nothing, they matched with what they replaced, you know, with a new light pole that was totally streamlined. Unless you stare at it, you almost don't even recognize the antenna on the top, and everything else was contained. So there is a lot of options to
So your height is 120 feet?
That's a transport pole.
Transport
That's,
pole.
that's a transport pole.
What's the base, what kind of a base do you need for that?
That's a 40-inch diameter pole on about a 50-inch diameter, foundation.
But the foundation's underground, correct?
Foundation
Yep.
is typically based on soils conditions, would determine the depth, but typically 20 to 25 feet underground, just generically, and a generic 50-inch diameter embedment type
So-
foundation.
I know we asked lots of questions today about the, you know, the small cells and, you know, the overall plan, right? Everything, aggregate, you know, transport flows, the small cells, stuff like that. So it comes back around to the, you know, really a design criteria that the engineers use, is that you're not gonna lock in the item that you could probably have the most flexibility to move, right, first, right? You're gonna lock in the thing that is gonna be the most difficult to site first, right? So that's the thing that's why I believe we have more of the transport poles that are proposed at this point, because we're trying to get feedback from the communities on where those transport
Right.
poles are most likely to be, you know, approved by your communities. And once we get those kind of in place, or the design in place, then it's much easier to go back and, you know, sprinkle in the mini macros that augment that coverage and bring the coverage to the most dense parts of the network.
Peter, I actually, I'm a little confused. I just wanna clarify.
Yep.
Quick question. So, the transport poles are the ones you refer to as potentially occurring every quarter mile? Those are the transport.
No, those are the taller ones. Those are not every quarter mile. The mini macro poles are more like
Every
every
quarter
quarter
mile,
mile.
so
So if there's something where there's really dense coverage, right, we're gonna know, yeah, we're gonna need a mini macro there,
Mhm.
right? And it's gonna go back to some transport pole, right?
Mhm.
But, you know, whether it's on one end of the street or the other end of the street may depend on where that transport pole is located, right? That's just kind
But
of.
I mean, what's maximum distance for the line of sight between the transport pole and the main?
They could be probably a mile or more,
Okay.
yeah.
I had 2 other quick questions, I think. So, when you were discussing the potential and prospect to move out of right-of-way and onto municipal land, and talked about negotiating a price. I heard you earlier say that you would negotiate pricing commensurate with your costs to be in the public right of way. So how does it benefit the community to go they're gonna get the payment either way, right? And they're gonna get the same payment whether you're in the municipal right of way or you're on the municipal land. You don't intend to pay them a premium to go on municipal land.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not a lawyer. Some communities can't charge us for access into the right of way, right? So in that case, you know, there's no fee, right? I'm not totally sure what the law is in Connecticut for access and how that comes down to the municipality. Maybe we should have brought David with us.
Well, we're talking about municipal right of way.
Right.
Got it. One last question. So in a given community, if you're proposing the site in municipal right of way or let's say state-owned right of way, presumably the DOT, but it could be another state entity. Do you negotiate the state right of way with the state agency, not with the municipality?
Correct.
Yeah, generally that's the way it's been done. Some of the state agencies will ask us to make sure that we communicate with the jurisdiction to take any concerns that they have back to, you know, that approval process. But in that case, generally that state DOT would give us a state permit for working in their right of way.
Right, you get an encroachment permit from them.
Yeah.
And you, so I'm actually more concerned if you start negotiating with other state agencies who don't typically communicate with municipalities in the way we work with DOT and municipalities. Do you have state land like that under consideration?
No, the only thing we've been working on is really, it's right of way, so but it's not right of way like, MBTA, we're not looking at the train right of way, we're looking at the highway right of way. So we're looking at, DOT, not train right of way or Amtrak right of way or anything like that.
In Connecticut, it's DOT. DOT owns the rail right away anyway, so
Okay.
you're good. Okay.
I have a question. I know Woodbury didn't get a package, but this morning on the way in, I passed a parked truck that had your name on it. So do you have plans for Woodbury, or was your driver lost?
You saw a truck with our name on it?
That's what it said. That's what it said, Mobility.
Wow.
Huh.
Might have been AT&T Mobility.
AT&T has Mobility?
Yeah, they spell it different. But a lot of their work trucks say Mobility with a Y.
Really? Ah.
I'm not sure we have trucks yet.
We don't
Wow.
have trucks yet.
So
Okay.
it had to be AT&T.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that answers the question.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
because the way AT&T's set up is they have like their wireless division and then they have their other divisions. So, as Luke points out, those trucks that generally run around are more with the wireless division of AT&T.
Yeah, because we don't have the other kind here.
Right. Yeah, unless they have fiber or something like that.
And Joanna, is Wolcott represented here today?
They're not here today, but they had that question in at the end
Yeah.
that they'd like to know, is what they sent me.
We do have a site in Wolcott, and I reached out to Wolcott, and I believe they said they never received the introduction package. So, yeah.
It's probably better. Yeah.
Yeah, so, when I was looking at the plans, they had the wrong city on it, they had Waterbury. So I corrected the plan, and I have a new set. And I have the letter also that I referenced that is going out, being hand-delivered to all the jurisdictions that talk about no time clock ticking, that the original was just intended as an introduction, and it details how we intend to follow what we understand so far with the CSC process.
When will that
So,
be sent?
I'm gonna make an appointment to try to go
Delivered.
see David, yeah.
Yeah, most of the stuff is gonna be hand delivered now. we've stubbed our toe many times with this mailing things in. And now that we have people like Emma and Brian, you know, they're gonna be a lot more present in the communities.
Is Southbury on your list?
Not yet,
Why?
not yet. Southbury
Plymouth?
and Woodbury, not yet,
Plymouth?
not yet.
Not yet.
Guess we don't rate, huh?
Yeah, that's okay. You got your hands full anyhow.
Any last questions?
I just have, just knowing that it is coming our way, that you're getting closer with the CSE, when can we expect the, revamped package? Is it this month, next spring, next summer?
No, it'll come fairly soon. What we have to, provide you with some additional, reports, and those reports are contracted now to be produced.
Okay.
So you're gonna see the same plan, but what I'd like to do, even before the official package, is I'd like to come back in front of you and hand deliver the letter. And I'd like to have with me, knowledge of, parameters of coverage to take a look at where you would prefer. If that municipal property, is your prime solution, or if another point on a road right of way somewhere in that vicinity is a better location for you.
So that's something that I could work with my community with. And we know the one pole we're both talking about.
Yes.
Now, what about the one in the state right of way that's on a very dangerous curve that we're all
I would like to talk
Could
about.
I also look for alternatives?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be in a state right of way. I can
Correct.
possibly move it out into a
Correct.
better location for
You
everyone.
can move it on a town road, and let's do that when I have this this propagation map, so
Okay,
that
great.
we can see where we can go. And I'll make an appointment with you and your team to do that.
Sounds good, thank you.
Okay.
So right now you have 6 communities in our region, or are there more now? That was in September.
We started this, there were 5 in,
Yeah.
Municipal
And
right,
Bristol.
and Bristol
And
and state
Bristol,
right away.
yeah.
So that's it right now?
Is that it right now?
That I not, that I know of,
She
yeah.
knows of it.
Yeah,
And have you made contact with Shelton?
I have, yes.
Who you're dealing with? Do you know who you're dealing with?
Yes, I do know. Shelton? Shelton, I spoke with Rick Schultz,
Okay, thank you.
and I met with them, late August.
Good.